1,000-pound bomb. Later versions would have carried 4 quick-firing cannon for tank busting. The unique feature of the HS-132 was that the pilot did not sit in a conventional cockpit. Instead, the pilot lay prone on his stomach, with his head at the front of the perspex canopy. This position allowed the pilot to withstand 10 to 12 times the force of gravity before blacking out, instead of the 5 to 6 Gs if he was sitting. The primary target for the HS-132 was the main Soviet battle tank, the T-34. A late model T-34 had armor plate nearly 3 inches thick. Had the HS-132 been ready in time and in sufficient numbers, it might have held back the tide of Russian tanks on the Eastern Front. Especially in the hands of legendary Nazi tank buster Hans Rudel. Flying the old Ju-87, Rudel single-handedly destroyed 519 Russian tanks.
The greatest Stuka pilot of all time was a man called Hans Rudel, who destroyed over 500 Russian tanks on the Eastern Front, as well as a large Russian battleship. Rudel was a fanatical devotee of Hitler. He fought to very end, indeed survived World War II, and in the closing days, Hitler wanted him to take over command of all the German jet forces. And had there developed a version of the Stuka powered by jets, then those would have been under the command of Rudel, and that would have been a very effective combination.
In the dying hours of the Third Reich, Hitler proposed to put Rudel in charge of all Germany's jet fighters and bombers. But it was too late. Fortunately for the Russians, their tanks captured the HS-132 factory before the 3 completed prototypes had been flight tested. Their subsequent fate is still unknown.
The Russians were very fortunate, and it was a fortunate accident that their area of occupation in Germany took in 80% of the German aircraft industries. Heinkel, Messerschmitt, Junkers. They acquired Arado aircraft, they acquired a large range of aircraft, but crucially they acquired 2 things, which was the BMW 003A engine and the Jumo 004A jet engines. What happened was that basically the German jet industry, German aircraft designers, technicians, and the aircraft were moved back to the Soviet Union. And it's from that point, I think, that one can really say the period of German-directed and German equipment entered into the Soviet aircraft industry.
If World War II had lasted into 1946, then the early German jets commanded by Hans Rudel would have had to face Allied jets, the British Meteor and American Lockheed Shooting Star. Realizing this, Hitler knew he needed a faster second-generation superjet to kill these Allied fighters. The result was Germany's last jet. In 1943, before D-Day, the High Command of the Luftwaffe began to fear that America might use its new superbomber, the Boeing B-29, in Europe. The B-29 could fly at well over 30,000 feet, too high for the engines of the Me-262 jet fighter to work efficiently. There was worse news for Nazi Germany. America was already building the consolidated B-32 Dominator, designed to attack Europe at high altitude direct from bases in the continental United States. To counter these threats, the Nazi Air Ministry commissioned a new jet engine to power a fast, high-altitude fighter. This engine was the Heinkel HES-011. But there was a problem in building superfast jets. Fast World War II piston-engine fighters, such as the Mustang, often crashed in mysterious circumstances when they went into power dives. Unknown at the time, air builds up in front of an aircraft's wings as it approaches the sound barrier, 760 miles per hour, jamming the controls. But Nazi scientists, working secretly in the 1930s, discovered that a swept wing delayed the buildup of the dangerous air pressure in front of the wing leading edge. The new engine, coupled with swept wings, could give Nazi Germany a weapon to counter the B-29 and the Dominator. It was called the Focke-Wulf TA-183. The TA-183's designer was Dr. Kurt Tank. Tank was already famous for building the legendary Focke-Wulf FW-190 fighter used against the Russians on the Eastern Front.
Kurt Tank is a very shadowy figure, but he's one of the great German aircraft builders of World War II. A very serious Nazi indeed. He built the 4-engine Focke-Wulf Condor bombers that helped guide the German U-boats against the Atlantic convoys. He built the FW-190 fighter, and he always said of that he was building a workhorse, by which he meant it could be repaired in the field and kept going, and indeed did during the Eastern Campaign. And he compared that to Willy Messerschmitt's Me-109, which he said was just a thoroughbred racehorse. He didn't think very much of it.
Tank's design was chosen in March 1945. It was called the TA for Tank 183. Its nickname was Hunchback. A single-engine machine, its planned speed was 593 miles per hour. The secret of the Hunchback's performance would be the revolutionary swept wings. Its combat altitude was to be 45,000 feet, spectacular for its time. But Tank faced another problem. The first generation of German fighters, the Messerschmitt Me-262, flew too fast for accurate shooting with conventional cannon, yet to slow down risked being shot down by Allied Mustang and Thunderbolt escort fighters. Jet fighters needed a new offensive armament: the air-to-air guided missile. But these were already being developed by Hitler's scientists.
The Germans were developing a whole range of technologies, defensive technologies, by the end of World War II, including air-to-air missiles. The Allies only started developing air-to-air missiles seriously at the time of the Korean War, so you're talking a 10-year lead the Germans had. They had wire-guided missiles which paid out a long wire back to the launch fighter aircraft, and the pilot of the fighter aircraft could send signals to navigate the missile directly onto its target. Another technology they used was infrared. They had a system of using a light from the bombers to trigger guns and missiles on the attacking fighters. The most successful air-to-air missiles were actually the simplest, which were just firing masses of unguided missiles in a big arc and hoping a bomber got caught. Had they deployed those early enough, then they could have killed the B-17s and the B-24s.
The Ruhrstahl X-4 missile. Development began in 1943. The X-4 was guided to its target using a wire control link to the mother aircraft. Early versions had a speed of over 700 miles per hour. The first X-4 was successfully launched from a Focke-Wulf FW-190 on August the 11th, 1944. It would be the weapon of choice for the new TA-183 jet. If the war had lasted into 1946, things would have been very different. Armed with deadly X-4 air-to-air missiles, the fast TA-183s could have downed high-flying US bombers, including B-32 Dominators carrying atom bombs, on strikes from US bases. But the TA-183 was ordered into production in March 1945, only 2 months before the collapse of Nazi Germany. It never flew. At least, not then.
Kurt Tank and Germany's leading fighter pilot, Adolf Galland, took a whole series of German aircraft engineers and Luftwaffe officers to Argentina and essentially recreated the Luftwaffe there. Kurt Tank set up an aircraft industry to build jet planes, and Galland set up a jet fighter force for the Argentine Air Force.
This is what would have faced and destroyed Allied B-29s in 1946. The TA-183, built in Argentina after the war for General Perón. It was rechristened the Pulqui, Spanish for arrow. Some even think that the legendary Soviet MiG-15 was based on captured blueprints of the TA-183.
I think the priority from the Russian point of view was to make absolutely sure that they had a knowledge and experience with jet propulsion. The second thing was to get it into aircraft, their aircraft, make them work, and above all have a semblance, as I say, of combat aviation capability.